And a special welcome to our board members, Jamie Inman, Jim Joustra, Admiral McKnight, Nancy Phillips, and General Rice, all of whom have either directly or indirectly experience with VMI. So we're really happy to have all of you with us for the first meeting. Obviously, there's an unfortunate situation where one person who we wish was here is not with us, actually, General Dominy. And I think all in this room have benefited enormously General Dominy over the years. His leadership, his demeanor, his both push us, but also encourage us. I think we're very much going to miss him around the table. I'll have a chance to say that again to the broader group tonight. But Ernie, again, I think you've been a good mouthpiece in terms of sharing with me and others about just the developments with General Dominy, and just want to thank you for doing so. And I know you're taking back to the family our great concerns, because it's not just a great loss for you and the family, great loss for this nation, but also a great loss for VMI for the leadership he brought to the table.
Yeah. Saying all that, they all hear it.
Yeah, please, thank you so much. The one thing I would say, again, we've got a very full agenda to go through, so we don't want to take too much time on that. But before we do, anything any board members would like to say, both new board members and existing board members, in terms of things they've seen or hear or have observed over the course, especially of our new members with some of their orientation work, but even with our existing board members. Touch on a lot of things, I think, Cedric, in the course of a couple of days together. But just open it up if there's anything that you'd like to say on program. Jim.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. Going up to Richmond for the initial orientation, I really didn't know anybody there, and the topics they covered in terms of what the governor and Secretary of Education, Secretary of the Commonwealth, and also the legal counsel we got. They made it really clear to us what our direction should be, what their vision was. And I found that really inspiring. And, I'll go through it really quickly. But budget finance, obviously, they talked about that and how it's really important each college shows the value proposition of their organization and meets budgets and sticks to budgets. There was a real emphasis on free speech on campus and how that applied not only to the students, but any visitors that are coming in. And that was big. DEI as a topic was discussed, and diversity and inclusion has been and continues to be a priority. And I don't see that as any change here. I think we've been doing it for a long time. Supreme Court admissions policies and the recent ruling and compliance with that. Another thing that I thought was really interesting was they talked about not just getting our students through college, getting them a diploma, but also being able to represent, to illustrate the effectiveness of their degree as they enter the workforce and what their effectiveness is in the workforce. They talked about behavioral health, certainly, social media and those types of things have added quite a bit of pressure to students these days. And so there's a real sensitivity there that we need to be cognizant of. And then the last one was safety on campus. And that was to ensure that we had a good process, good risk assessment, because as we know, there's been some violent situations that occurred. We would hate to see anything like that certainly happen here, but that was the 7th point they made. And, so I just wanted to share it because to me, as a new board member coming on, hearing that direction, it was very clear we should be focused on what we should. So I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you sharing that, Jim. Again, just as I made notes of them, I think many of these are obviously direct responsibilities of either the board or one of our committees. So I think it's a good checklist, though, to be sure we're not missing something. So I think that's helpful. Any other thoughts or comments? Other than that, we'll jump into the agenda. I think just as a housekeeping matter, I think, as you know, we added a little more time to this first section because we always seem to go over in what's a very important section for Cedric and the team to sort of share some highlights of what's happening. So We've now got a full 2.5 hours, and we'll see whether that actually works. But again, it's one of those things that really set things up very well. The other thing I just remind you, this is live streaming this meeting. For meetings, and just remind you of that. But any other housekeeping things, Bill, I should touch on before we launch into the program? Okay, good. Cedric, all yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Welcome back, board members. Welcome to our new board members. Welcome back to VMI. Start of another academic year 23-24. There's a number of topics that we have teed up for discussion. I think all are very relevant, consistent with some of the discussions Alstra just made with respect to the conversations during the orientation for new board members. You'll find that many of those topics are some of the areas that we've been talking about and discussing and looking at our plans and how we're executing to make sure that we're consistent with that, and or it is just something that has occurred here at VMI for centuries, close to 2 centuries, but we always have to continue to keep a watchful eye on it. There are a couple of things that I'd like to go through, and what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to go through a number of topics to set the conditions for what will occur with the follow-on briefers. In some instances, I will talk more at the wave top level because a lot of the detailed discussions will take place in the committee meetings to allow the committees to discuss and debate and understand whatever those particular topics are. In some instances, there will be more in-depth briefings that I will give specifically with regard to the strategic plan, which I'll brief during the lunch hour. Development of that, you all have a hard copy or books, I believe, and you also had a digital copy that was sent to you probably a little over. But I'll be able to talk about that. So with the first slide, just want to talk a little bit about the summer and some of the things that happened over the summer. You see here we had 2 summer sessions. These are the numbers in terms of the number of VMI students and or prospective students that attended summer session 1, summer session 2. Also, summer transition program, I think we are starting to return closer to numbers that we had pre-COVID. One of the unique aspects of the summer transition program is that of the 168 attendees, roughly about 46 to 48 were Division I football players. So our new coach, Coach Danny Rocco, learned about and understood the program and how it and its present construct and wanted to ensure to the greatest possible way that our football athletes could come and get acclimated to the Institute through the STP program. As a part of the strategy, we're talking about doing some innovative things with programs like STP to kind of, number one, be able to measure the return value on that program, and also with some of the Pell Initiative money that I'll talk about a little later, to widen the aperture of who might attend, but to be able to measure the performance with that attendance and how it brings value to the success of cadets as they enter into their cadetship.
Cedric, it'd be good to remind us, so how long has that program been underway? And again, even though it sounds like you're trying to do some measurements, is it clear that by going to that, you improve graduation rates or whatever, some of the metrics that you all look at?
So the program has been around at least for a couple of decades, as I understand it. What we've not found is that there were clear established metrics of the value of the STP program. Anecdotally, you hear all the time from students that it was valuable to them to kind of get oriented and active. But I think when we start talking about student success, there's an opportunity to leverage the STP program, broaden it, focus it more on areas to do assessments of academic preparedness, physical preparedness of students, and then to be able to establish a good set of sound metrics that will help us measure whether or not there's value in the program in the way that we're gonna alter it. So. The dean will discuss in more detail the pieces about the STP and how we've begun to make the shift in the focus of the STP program. Academics, just talk a little bit about some of the things that happen in the academic space. One of the things I will tell you is, as a part of our strategy, is also creating more opportunities for students to flourish academically through other opportunities such as internships, faculty exchanges, where faculty might go and participate with another college or university, or another S&T, science and technology organization, to be able to hone their skills and keep it relevant to bring something back to the classroom. So for example, this past year, we had one of our faculty members go up to the Army Research Lab and spend about 10 weeks in an opportunity to engage in some of the areas of research that the Army Research Lab is doing for the Army. We also had about eight students that got opportunities to go and do internships across the nation, working in some of the Army Research Labs outstation sites. So, for example, they have a site where they do test and research out in White Sands Missile Range. And so we sent a couple of cadets out there. We sent kids up to Aberdeen Proving Ground to work in some of the labs up there. I think we sent a couple down to Huntsville, Alabama, to the research lab portion down there. So expanding opportunities for research is one of the things we've been talking about. And also bringing in more research here to the Institute, that undergraduate research where students could partner with faculty in research projects. Right now, currently, I think we have in the form of grants somewhere between $3 and $5 million that we get, mostly from a cybersecurity grant that comes from the Army through partnership that we have with the other 5 senior military colleges. And so there's an opportunity, I believe, to be able to leverage more in terms of undergraduate research. That's something that in the surveys, that in the student responses, they indicated that they would like to see more of. And it's something that we've thought about and we'll talk about with respect to the strategy. But with regard to some of this, we had 30 cadets that were here in the student undergraduate research program that we do run here over the summertime. And I think that is certainly a good return on investment for young people, either in STEM majors or not in the STEM majors, liberal arts, to have an opportunity to come and participate in academic research with our faculty. We had 2 cadets, one cadet who received a scholarship to study in the Arabic language in the Arabic language in Jordan for the during the 23-24 years, so this coming year, Antonio Ahanj. And then we had one cadet, Miss Yemelinova, class of 25, who is a recipient now for Bull's ROTC Fellowship. And finally, we had Cadet Schaefer, Nicholas Schaefer, class of 23, who presented a paper during an AI conference where he did virtually that presentation. So all these, again, represent and reflect many of the various different academic opportunities that exist for cadets here at VMI, and we're looking to increase more of those opportunities. The CAL program, which we have an agreement versus a partnership where we support the CAL program. Many of you all know that that's a long-running program established by Gene Williams, VMI alum. And so it celebrated its 31st year. We provide support for them in terms of some facilities. Many of the student counselors that help with the program are VMI cadets. They had a very, very strong lineup of guest speakers in various different topics to help mentor these young boys that Gene Williams brings in. Ken Harvey, former Arizona Cardinal, Washington, formerly Redskins, now a Washington Commanders player. Chief Angela Green of the Lexington Police Force, Sheriff Steve Funkhauser, and then retired General J.R. Gorham. These were all guest speakers during the CAL program.
May not be aware, but some do know, but these are at-risk youths that actually come into this program, actually.
By and large, many of them are identified as at-risk youth, or at least at risk from the perspective what their future holds. Does their future direct them in a path that would lead them through college, to college? And so I think what Gene and his program is designed to do is, number one, reinforce to those young men and women that they, or young men rather, that they do have the smarts and the chops if they decide to come to college or enter into college, but to also reinforce positives about whatever chosen path it is that they want to pursue. Matriculation, Joe Hagee's going to talk a little bit about our ability to achieve a number of 491 matriculation during matriculation. And he's going to get into a fair amount of detail after I speak about what we were able to do. We certainly are very, very pleased with the number that we were able to bring in. And it was through a lot of effort, by everybody, kind of picking up the mantle and making sure that we ran through this whole process through this plan. And so as a result of that, we got the number that exceeded the goal of 450 that we set for ourselves. We learned a lot, had an opportunity to implement quite a few things in how we go after kids in our recruitment efforts. And I think we learned a lot so that we can make it a repeatable endeavor. I think that by the numbers, you will see that it's a very, very robust class, a very, very academically qualified class, a very diverse class, and all these things, in my view, bode well for the Institute as we look to. But Joe's going to talk about that. What we did want to do, and what I do want to show, is a quick video that was put together by our communications and marketing team of the events of Matriculation Week. I will tell you that certainly we're tracking very, very closely. Tricia Commandant will speak to some of the interventions that we put in place for this year to try to help us through the matriculation process. One of the things that I noticed as I'm walking around is oftentimes the challenge of a young person coming to this environment really begins to show itself probably within the first 24 to 48 hours. And you're going to find a lot of young people who get here and then all of a sudden they're immersed in the stressors of matriculation hell week. And some of them will want to automatically push the easy button and say, hey, this isn't for me. And so those interventions are necessary to help kind of guide them through their decision-making process. Ultimately, there are some that flat out weren't cut out to be here. We had a number. We had one young man that indicated he decided he wanted to try it out. Well, that just shows kind of a lack of commitment if you can make a statement like that as to why you've decided to leave. But our numbers are looking very good in terms of those that have OP. I think we're somewhere around 25 total. We've gotten past that Hell Week phase where you typically get a large number and moved into everything going from the start of class at a drop period. And I think we've kind of settled into a tempo or a rhythm where we will see kids making a determination on how well they feel VMI is a fit to them, how well they feel they're academically cut out to be here, and how well they feel that they can continue to pursue down the path of the RAT and the academic experience, all the military environment as we head towards the end of the semester. And then we'll see in terms of what happens. But right now, we're looking pretty good, operating, tracking somewhere around the average number of drops that would typically occur during this year. So I want to show you a quick video of Matriculation Week, just so you can get a flavor of the type of adversity that is thrown at these young people upon entering VMI.
Round 2024 plus 3. Welcome. Today, with VMI, for today, welcome to Batman, to the sacred wall of America. Round individual, here, part face. Individual, look up to life, down up to life, down up. Individual, up to life. Sure. After this moment, none of that matters anymore. Credit or about not or about the corner on the street, on our society, still, work us, greed, sense of power, if, out of honor, courage, resilience, business, self-respect, for all up. One day, we will break some all up. This is clothing, rather clothing, bigger, neighbors, or not. They tell, all up, like, BMI, leadership level, that incorporates adversity, stress, or I become, be like that, but that here, right middle, five system, even education, motivation, top, the graduate. And all over the world, scripted, art system, survival of my country, make no mistake. Our system comes at a price. Art is the country. But you right of a strong work as you intermarry. We count ways which you never imagined. Our abundance of life would be intentional, never protection. Responsible, your own personality, always balance yourself, learn more, achieve, if you think yourself capable. If you're looking down, don't say. There are no secrets that in life. So, preparation, hard work, practice, sense of responsibility, work fearlessly, be fearless, but hard work, knowing that it's easy, everyone to do. Lastly, have confidence, knowing that failure be your guide to success.
Okay. Say, for those who didn't hear the first captain, he did all that without notes. He really was spectacular in front of a whole group. It was quite and I think we'll have a chance. I think people have had a chance to meet him, but we'll be at dinner, I believe, tonight as well.
We'll have a chance to meet him in dinner, and then tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll have the class leaders quick opportunity to talk to the board. It's kind of their expectations for this academic. Last year and this year, I want to bring attention to kind of the organizational changes that have occurred last year. Obviously, there were a number of key changes that we made this year. There's probably more minor adjustments, and what is really more important about this chart is just to kind of tell you or show you some of the people that are performing in various roles, either in an acting capacity or in a capacity where we have recently made selections on key positions in the Institute. And so you see here a couple things that I'd like to highlight for you. in terms of the organization. Number one, those folks that are highlighted in blue, they represent the Institute executives for the Institute. And so that begins with our Chief of Staff and certainly then our Dean of the Faculty, Athletic Director, the Commandant, and Deputy Superintendent. And so that's the brain trust, if you will, of executive leaders that I typically will bring together either through our governance as it pertains to policy development, policy recommendations to me for approval, and there are times when I need to bring together a group to discuss key issues pertaining to the Institute and how it's operating. That's that group. The change is reflected because previously the Chief Diversity Officer was recruited and hired to be a member of the executive staff. And with the departure of Jamaica Love, we've taken that Chief Diversity position, which has always been identified as part of the special staff, and restructured it where the Chief Diversity Officer is now no longer a member of these senior executives. However, the Chief Diversity Officer plays an important role in an advisory capacity to me on the training, on the policy development, and the education that goes on in that particular space. You see the others, Chief Counsel Pat O'Leary, our Inspector General Title IX coordinator is now having been selected, Alyssa Asfan, who's in the room. Alyssa comes back to us having worked for the Institute for a number of years in auxiliary services. She competed for the position after having been away for about a year to attend Naval War College, and now she's back, and we've selected her to be our IG Title IX coordinator. Institute Sergeant Major is still Sergeant Major Sowers. Can't really see underneath. Chief Information Officer is Daryl Campbell, with the retirement of Wes Robinson after close to 40 years of being the Institute's Director for Information Technology. And so we've rescoped that position to now be more of a Chief Information Officer as we begin to think about shaping and developing policies around information technology and information security, and other things that relate to our command control computers communications that operate here on the Institute. Institutional effectiveness under Lee Rakes has now been reorganized under the Dean, primarily because of the role that Lee and his team play in the development of all the work that needs to go on for accreditation. And then last year, I briefed the board on the creation of a new position for the superintendent, assistant superintendent for strategic enrollment management. And that position is still vacant. The Pell grant money that we proposed and were the recipient of, the $3.8 million, will allow us to go and make a decision about advertising and bringing someone in to fill that role and to staff that position up. That money, as you recall, is 4-year money, totaling about $3.8 million. So just under $1 million a year to get a number of different initiatives that are geared towards not only increasing our position in terms of the underrepresented population, but many of these initiatives and tools that we'll bring about will be beneficial to all of our cadets. But the initiation of it is certainly geared towards helping our position in terms of going after kids that come from the underrepresented population. more significant role in terms of academic success for our students. We have an advertisement out for a new director of the Miller Academic Center with the departure of Denise Young. Go ahead, next. So real quickly, the strategic plan, again, I briefed the XCOM yesterday, just kind of talked about the evolution of the development of the strategic plan that you all were emailed, and where we are with the strategic plan. And so we believe that the draft strategic plan as it has had a lot of work go into it. It's been a whole team approach. It started off with a series of events going as far back as the assessment that I performed early on during my time here as the interim to help inform the ideas that are contained in that document. And about a year ago, a little over a year ago, May of 2022, I believe it was, May of 2022. I produced a document that was called Initial Planning Guidance that went out to the staff to begin organizing ourselves around the strategic planning effort that had to take place. And also a survey was conducted to the whole of VMI, not only our students, our faculty, but our alumni as well, to try to tease out and get some insight into things that they viewed as important for VMI to ensure that we were doing as we move forward into the 21st century. Through a number of different committee or group settings that included participation by Mr. Washington, the board president, and one of our members, John Adams, we held an offsite where a group from the performance management group coming out of the Wilder School helped facilitate discussion in a number of key areas that we began to shape as the strategic initiatives. It totaled a total of 6 strategic initiatives. One was just about operations of the Institute. And so what we did was we called it down to 5, those 5 that you see on the left side of this chart that I'll talk about here during the lunch hour with respect to what the goals and objectives are and how we arrived at those as the strategic initiatives. And then kind of the important features of what we believe this strategic initiative is intended to do, which is improve our brand reputation, enhance our communications, both digital, web, and written communications, create a positive environment on our public relations front, and then improve our internal communications. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward during the course of the day. Updated plans and policies. So for the last couple of years, the Commandant and I, we have conversations about the focus and the priorities as it pertains to the core. And this has been particularly important coming out of the COVID environment, because if you recall, we spent an entire year where many of the normal activities of day-to-day things related to discipline, related to physical activities, related to a whole bunch of things that are central and important to the Institute were curtailed. And so one of the important things that we've tried to emphasize over the last couple of years is to return back to standards. And so this year, the conversation between myself and the Commandant has really been about discipline and things in this area. Is this the chart, Bill? Okay, so I'm sorry, Michelle. So these are the areas of focus that I've asked the Commandant and his staff to make a particular point of emphasis. And as you can imagine, they are the types of things that we need to be focused on to make sure that our young people, both in the barracks and as they conduct themselves here on post, and to the wider Lexington community, that we are doing the right thing, and that these things certainly don't run consistent with the code of the cadet. And so certainly illegal drug use go back. Activities that occur in the barracks, everything from sex in the barracks to cohabitation in the barracks, alcohol use on post in the barracks and in other places, and then the issue of contact time and how those things occur to make sure that folks understand that while the bulk of the day for cadets is generally usually the same, there are certain activities that members of the cadet, whether they're a club sport, whether they're a club activity, whether they are in the regimental system doing the planning for the next set of operations execution, whether they are part of RAT Challenge, that all those things are the other activities that all cadets are going to be involved in some way, shape, or form, but not all the same and not always to the same degree. The expectations, one of the challenges that I put before the core leaders for this year is to reestablish and bring back the sense of spirit and pride in the Institute in all walks of life, whether it is dealing with something that has to do with barracks life, whether it's something that has to do with activities in the classroom, over in the leadership environment, over in the Center for Leadership and Ethics, or in our many different athletic endeavors, whether it's NCAA or club sports, to bring back a sense of spirit and pride. Live by the code of the cadet. We went through great pains to update that statement. It's contained in the RAT Bible. It's something that all the cadets, all the RATs are expected to know and learn, and also to live by it, part of their way of life while they're here at VMI. And then do things by the book. We have Blue Book, which has been revised, curtailed down to a manageable set of rules that people can read and understand. We've kind of taken out a lot of the things that normally reflect as standard operating procedures. And the intent is to make sure that cadets live by the book. They understand it. They follow the rules and the policies, whether it's the Blue Book, whether it's the Red Book, the White Book, or the Green Book, but live by the book. And that's the standard by which the Commandant and their staffs will enforce.
Just checking, we all have a copy of the book. Yes, please.
Yeah, we haven't populated it in the new portal, but
Okay,
we'll do that right after the meeting.
good, thank you.
Get some RAT Bibles.
That was too.
You're gonna make us a site out of that? Together? Afterward.
Okay, strategic communications. So during the external communication from Wyatt about the strategic communications plan for this academic year, it'll highlight many of the themes and messages, the external communications that we intend to broaden for the Institute. Where last year the communications was principally centered on the focus of effort and priority, which was our enrollment and pursuing to get achieve our enrollment goals. We've begun to broaden it with things in terms of a revamped website. The vmi.edu website has been kind of revamped, and there's an ongoing effort with that. You see many of the different products that the communications and marketing team are putting together, like the matriculation video that I showed you. And it's not uncommon to have people from our communications and marketing team in and around post catching a lot of the day-to-day activities, everything from kind of a revision and an update to the Institute report and a lot of the other documents that are being produced to try to make sure that awareness and understanding of what's going on and the focus on making sure that the academic experience, the experience for cadets as a whole, is consistent with what we expect, what they expect, and what we feel is necessary produce young men and women of character. We'll talk about the policies. I think there was a chart, and if you go back to the policy on transgender. Here we go. There was a discussion yesterday with the XCOM on how they want to proceed with the development of the policies and procedures with respect to transgender cadet. As you all are probably aware, last year or this last recruiting cycle, there was an identified cadet prospect that identified themselves as transgender, and the student ended up not coming for this academic year, but we still have work to do to make sure that our policies and our procedures reflect the understanding of what VMI would have to do to accommodate an individual who is identified as transgender, non-binary, on and on and on. So we had originally prepared a resolution, but we are going through the work to, number one, look at a couple of policies, principally GO 13 and GO 16, that talk about practices consistent with Title IX that we expect for all cadets, but the revisions will make sure that they incorporate an understanding that this applies to transgender cadets as well. It's also about looking at other policies. We know that there's a need to establish a set of standard operating procedures. Work is ongoing to develop that as well. And then the standard operating procedures will talk about things that are highlighted in that third bullet, the health and wellness of these young men and or women, how they identify, when they identify, what the policies are with regard to that, how they're housed, what birthing facilities, bathing facilities are necessary, the uniform expectations on it. And then not only that, but that those policies will need to consider not only the rights of the transgender student that chooses to come to the institute, but also the rights of those other cadets that are here. And so we've got some work to do. The plan and what we intend to do is continue to finalize those policies where the execs will see them. They'll be brought to me. We'll have a conversation about it to make sure that we've incorporated all the right pieces and parts to the policy. And then sometime here in the month of October, I think we can bring to the XCOM what the policies and procedures like to gain the approval of the Board of Visitors.
So,
The last thing that I have on the topic list is about the cadet. There's been a lot of talk about the Cadet Newspaper, a lot of things that have been out there, petitions, letters that have been written to the Secretary of Education, Attorney General. What I have directed, based on a conversation between myself and the board president, is that a fact-finding investigation be done by the Inspector General. As I mentioned to the XCOM yesterday, essentially I have three tools available to me to conduct investigations in various different areas. HR for HR-related matters, IG, Title IX for things that might affect discriminatory, race-based, sex, gender, all those things that fall up under Title IX, and to deal with normal complaints that might run counter to our policies and procedures. And then obviously I have legal counsel as well. So given the tools that I have, the process or the decision that I've made is to move forward with a fact-finding investigation on the circumstances surrounding the events leading up to the announcement of the award for the Cadet Newspaper, and the involvement of the Institute with respect to the conversations and communications that we initiated with the VPA, the Virginia Press Association, and then the conversations and the statements and information that was provided at the request of 2 media outlets. And so Alyssa Asfan is working on the fact-finding portions of the investigation. She expects to have something done by the end of this month. And then what I will do is I will coordinate with the board president on how that gets presented and the timing of when.
That's kind of a backward-looking sort of comment. Maybe anything, and not to specifically, but I assume that the intent is to try to continue to find ways going forward that we can continue to work in a way that works for everybody.
Sure.
And I don't want you to get, I don't think you want to get into specifics, but I
Right.
assume that's very much your MO going forward.
Sure. So we certainly, most recently, as recent as last year, we finalized a revised or an updated version of a statement on free speech and free expression here at the Institute. That runs consistent with the conversations that we've had with Duncan and support for that in higher education. We've done an update to that policy. VMI fully supports free speech and free expression in the framework that is laid out in that policy. With respect to the Cadet Newspaper, the Cadet Newspaper has and continues to operate independent of the Institute. They publish what they want. They write what they want. Presently, they are not recognized as an entity as a part of the Institute, and therefore they have no permit under which they operate. I and the dean have begun to engage with this year's round of cadet editors to let them know that, number one, they have an ability to operate under a permit that is very, very different from any other permit that exists, in that they want to practice journalism, right? And they want to be the voice of the core and speak freely and independently. They have an ability to do that. And so we are in the process of having discussion about how we can do that under a certain framework that would be acceptable to the Institute. But to give them an opportunity to write and exercise journalism and free speech and free expression, their ideas, but to do so responsibly. And so there's more work to be done. We've had a meeting with the cadet editors, this round of cadet editors, and there's a plan of action to move forward that they are undertaking, working with the dean.
General, is Mr. Morris recruiting cadets to write? How is it?
I don't know that
Somebody's.
the owner of the Cadet Foundation is recruiting the cadets. I believe the cadets work together. The outgoing or the senior editors work to recruit people onto the paper staff. And then they go out and they seek out those that are interested in writing stories, writing about various different topics, is what I understand. Okay. With that, I'm going to stop talking. I don't know if there are any questions, any additional questions for me by any board member on any of the things that I covered. The next topic, go ahead.
I just got one question. In the your organization, the ROTC, is that official? How does that integrate with the rest of the team?
Sure. So, and I'll get the commandant and the dean to add in. So ROTC, number one, falls up under the dean as a part of the academic program, right? So when it comes to the training and the education of all of our cadets through the ROTC department, they report to the dean. But then there's an aspect of it that pertains to the physical training and the regimen of integration between military life here in barracks and the training preparation for them to become commissioned officers, that there's, I would say, a dotted line with the commandant. You guys want to elaborate on that, or did I hit it about right?
I can add a couple of things. Just operationally, the 3 detachment heads are full members of my department head team that we meet regularly. They have a different role at the academic board. They attend the academic board meetings, they participate, but they're not voting members like the department heads are voting members on academic changes that come to this group. But they're fully integrated in the academic team as are other courses. And they have a little different role because when they change a course, that's coming from cadet command. And so we're just kind of, okay, it's not, doesn't quite it's the same review process, if you will, that we generate. Otherwise, they're full members of the academic team.
Thank you.
And then with the ROTC departments, we have a monthly any meeting that we do our calendar sync on. And then for any individual operations or military training aspects, we do a detailed coordination through my ops officer down to the ROTC department.
One of the things that we've tried to do, and I think we've had probably modest success, is to bring back more integration between the ROTC staff and the commandant staff. So if you recall, at least when I was a cadet, the OCs and the TAC officers essentially came from the ROTC departments as kind of collateral duty or additional duty for them. At some point that went away in large part because the ROTC, through their leadership and the cadet command leadership, saw that as something that they shouldn't be doing. While now the commandant has been working with the detachment for the Navy and Marines and the Army departments to get them a little bit more involved in resuming some roles as part of night OCs and TACs from time to time.
So we pick up an assistant tax. We picked up 2 Marines. In fact, they did the stair climb yesterday. Tactical officers, we have Air Force participation. Faculty falls in for assistant officer in charge at night. And so our tax, we have both the primary, which comes from my staff, and then an assistant, which comes from ROTC.
Terry, I'll mention one other thing, as you are hearing the board grow with it, in April, they do an FTX. And it's a great demonstration of the different ROTCs. So they'll all do their ROTC specific FTX. And the ROTC candidates that are there, say it's a third or second classman, they have their own leadership within that ROTC, separate from the board. So you'll find that very interesting, and it'll bring clarity on how all of that works, because it seems quite complicated, but it's become very fluid in my view. So you'll look forward to seeing that in April.
Okay.
Very well done. Just as we go forward to the more exhibits and things, can we get this put on the portal? Actually, the whole set of presentations actually.
Already up there.
It's up there. Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. With that, Joe? Shannon.
Good morning, everyone. Shannon and I stand before you today. You would think that we would have the opportunity to catch a breath. We're actually 6 weeks into the recruiting cycle for the class of 2028. So we want to share the time this morning with you, looking back at the class of 27, the class that we brought in, spend a lot of time also looking at where we're at with the class of 28 and beyond. So we'll look at first slide. This is a profile of the class of 2027, and I don't want to go through every point, but I just want to hit some of the highlights. So we ended the class with 13,427 inquiries. So these are hand raisers. So out of all the schools that we visit and all the names that we purchased and a lot of the recruiting efforts that were done by alumni and faculty and staff, we had 13,427 individuals raise their hand and say, I want to learn more about VMI. I'll show that in comparison to where we're at for the class of 28 later in the presentation. Out of those inquiries, we had 1,221 applications, and 989 of those were offered appointments to the Institute. So that's an acceptance rate of about 81%. So out of those that were appointed to the Institute, we ended up matriculating 490 plus one. We had one readmit to the RAT line. And so that ends up being a yield rate of about 50%. So compare last year, the acceptance rate was a little bit lower at about 70. Historically, we've been in that 50 to 55, 57 range. And yield has been around 50%. Last year, we were at 42.5%. So while we want to work and we have a plan to get that acceptance rate down so that we can increase our selectivity, we want to try to keep yield constant around 50%. Where that acceptance rate stands with our peers, four-year colleges in the state of Virginia, it's on par. Most colleges are in that 75 to 90% range for your publics. What is good, great, and I think it speaks to the value proposition of VMI. And what we learned this cycle was that there's still an appetite for the VMI experience. With our yield rate of 50%, most of our sister colleges in the Commonwealth are looking at a yield rate of around 27 to 35, 36%. So we're doing a lot better percentage-wise there.
So you attribute that to the interest of the cadets self-selecting this institute. So they're very interested and motivated to come here as opposed to normal non-military.
So the average high school GPA, so this is weighted, and we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive here in a few minutes. But the average high school GPA, so weighted, was a 3.61. The average academic GPA, so that's unweighted and looking at just core classes of first-time freshmen, was 3.26. The average transfer GPA was 3.12. That's weighted. You can take a look at the class rank. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. In-state, out-of-state, the ratio was 57-43. Male to female ratio, 85-15%. When you look along race lines, 72% of the RAC class identified as white Caucasian, 27% identified as racial minority, with 1% being not reported. So going back and looking, this is the most diverse class that VMI has ever brought in to barracks. Some attributes of our matriculating class. 36% are NC2A athletes. We had 43% attend open house. Subsequently, we know that those that attended open house that didn't matriculate, it's about 20 to 25%. So what we know is open house is a good indicator. And you learn pretty quickly, like, hey, this is the experience that I want, or no, it's not, and that's okay, right? So it's a great tool for recruiting and also for yield. And we had 29% attend STP. 26% participated in junior ROTC. 45% held some type of leadership position. And we matriculated RATs from 38 states, the District of Columbia, and 7 countries. All right, if there are any questions, we'll move to the next slide. Don't want to go over everything, but I want to just kind of hit some of the highlights of the recruiting cycle for the class of 27, some things that we learned, and then what's next, what's on our radar. So we beefed up our recruiting budget and infrastructure, and we were able to attend approximately 225 recruiting events. For a school our size, that's on the high end. We're trying to qualify some of those events in terms of what's the return on investment. And so you may see that number scaled back a little bit, but again, we want to focus on quality, not quantity. So our target is at 200 to 225, but we want to make sure that we're attending events that are worthwhile. We added the Common App, which is a game changer. On average, I briefed this out back in April. Typically, four-year public see a bump of 20 to 25% in their applications once they join the Common App. Definitely there. You'll see in a little bit. We integrated a new admissions CRM and a new primary admissions application, which is now 2 clicks from the homepage, whether you go Common App or the VMI application. And then another highlight was the response and popularity of Call to Duty. So that's the scholarship that covers room and board for National ROTC Scholarship winners. We attended JLab, which is a leadership and academic competition sponsored by the U.S. Army across all branches in Washington, D.C. in June. It was a 10-day competition. We had freshmen coming up to our table. We sponsored the event. They're like, hey, you still looking at Call of Duty? And so there's a lot of interest in that program, which is a good thing.
Can you just, I think that's like super important. Can you,
Yes.
like, can we get what are some specifics on how many were awarded? Do we have some of them?
Yes.
I'm going to brief that.
Oh, you're going to brief it? Oh, perfect. Great. Thank you.
Choose the brains. I just hit the high level. All right, so some lessons learned. What we saw, and we did an analysis and determined return on investment. The previous vendor that used for sophomore, junior search, very low ROI. And it was a difficult decision to make because it was a 17-year relationship that we have with that vendor, but ultimately we severed ties and we shift gears and went with a new vendor to assist us in getting the right type of prospects into our funnel. And we've seen a good jump and a healthy increase in the numbers of sophomores, juniors, and now seniors that are in our funnel for the class of 28 and beyond. As I said earlier, there's still a healthy appetite for the VMI experience, but stiff competition remains. And what I mean by that is we saw as some of the service academies were struggling to meet numbers. We saw late appointments from the service academies as late as June and even early July, and some of their preparatory schools. That we saw an increase in the number of cancellations after reservation. We also know with stiff competition, Virginia is a popular state when it comes to producing high quality young men and young women that are college bound. And so what we see as we face this enrollment cliff that's coming in the next year and a half is that our students are very attractive to out-of-state schools, and they're trying to compete for Virginia residents to bring them in. They're getting creative with financial programs. And so when you factor that in with an enrollment cliff in Virginia, 5 to 7% decrease in the number of college-bound students in 2025, it poses a stiff challenge for us, but it's one that we're going to tackle head on.
Sorry, one other question on that.
Sure.
What about Virginia Tech and their Corps of Cadets? Are they increasing the size? Do I recall that?
Yes, they are. Yep, and they are, and there's some creative financial programs that they are offering to increase the size of the Corps. Texas A&M, although we don't directly compete with them, they're doing something similar no matter what state you come from. If you join the Corps, you're getting in-state tuition. So there's some creative things that are out there. But what we know is that we're ahead of it. We're tracking it. We talk about it every day. And we feel that we're in a good position to meet our goal for the class of 28 and beyond.
Let's add to the Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech is at 1,200. Their target is 2,000.
So what's next? So moving into the class of 28 and beyond. So we want to expand the Common App to transfer applicants beginning next fall. Currently, transfer applicants, because the number is so small and the cost was high, we decided not to add that, but we want to expand that next year because we definitely see that there's a market to increase the number of transfer applicants and ultimately the number of matriculants that identify as transfer students or classify as transfer students. We're working on an online post tour. That's a joint effort. It's really spearheaded by communications and marketing, but working with admissions and financial aid. As a recipient of the Chev Pell Grant fund, we're able to add that, which will help increase access to learning about VMI. And then finally, STP scholarships to boost participation in that program. So we know about 29% participated in STP this year. When we get to a point where we get about 40, and that's our 4-year goal, 40 to 42% of incoming rats actually participate in STP. They're non-curricular students, so they're paying for the program out of pocket. Virginia residents, it's $30-some $100, and I think out of state it's a little bit over $5. So, at least for Virginia residents, we want to try to do what we can for those that are needy students, try to reach that barrier to accessing it.
Joe, if someone's in STP, have they been offered a position, a botany?
Yes, sir. So you cannot register, the way our process currently is, you cannot register for the summer transition program until you are a full reservation to the Institute. So they pay their deposit, they've cleared the medical process, or they've gone through the fitness review process and given conditional approval. And STP is that way for them to hone in their fitness in preparation for the fall.
We don't typically lose any of those cadets to matriculation or
We've lost a few. I think I know one this year that attended STP and left, but typically if you attend STP, you persist throughout the entire period and you matriculate. On 19 August, we were tracking 493 that we expected to show up, and 490 did. So, I mean, that's a pretty high percentage, but everybody that attended STP ultimately matured in August.
So you mentioned targeting transfer students. Is that going to be typically from community colleges, where they go there a year or so?
Yes. Yeah. So, VMI has a 3-year residency requirement. And so for transfer students, that can be somewhat unattractive. Completing a 2-year associate's degree and they have to attend 3 years or live 3 years on post, then it's 5 years to complete their degree. And knowing I wish Umberto was here, the number of credits typically for 4-year degree program is 120, at VMI is 136 to 140. Okay, 136 to 140. So with that being said, I think there's pathways and, through the Transfer Virginia portal and work that can be done with the 23 community colleges to try to say, if you complete X certificate of general education, and that's about 30 credits, that there's still a pathway to VMI where you can graduate on time. All right, good. Next slide.
Okay. One question, enlisting, is it under all 3 columns there?
Yes.
Is that their desire to serve and they want to be enlisted, or they could not afford a scholarship, or could not afford?
Most of the responses that we received is they wanted to go ahead. They have a desire to serve their country, and they wanted to go ahead and start. They wanted to start their career, and that's really the feedback that we received. So what you see up here, we started tracking this in December of 2022. Of everybody who we classify as a cancellation, whether it was before they pay their deposit, after they pay their deposit, or after they were a reservation. And you can see the percentage of the students' data information or the responses that we captured. The response rate was lower with cancel before deposit because a lot of these folks had never had an intention of coming. We may have been their second or their third choice. So that's why the response rate was 39%. It gets a lot higher after they pay their deposit and then ultimately the cancellation. So you can see that their reasons are various at each step of depending on their classification. But a few things I wanted to highlight. So for those that canceled before deposit, the majority of the responses that we saw were desired major, not a VMI. So specifically undeclared health sciences, nursing, and criminology, those tended to pop up a little bit, and that's okay, right? When we get that feedback, we try to map what their career goals are to the majors that we have at VMI and the minors that we have to fit that pathway for their career. But ultimately, those students chose to go elsewhere. Cost of attending was a little bit of an issue, primarily for students when we were competing with an out-of-state institution, which was within that student's home state. So it's difficult with our out-of-state tuition to compete for a student with in-state tuition in their home state. The reason why I think this is important is, one, we've got to start tracking it. It's key because we need to know what that feedback is, so that way we can communicate it to stakeholders on cross post. Say, here's what we're hearing from folks that applied but ultimately didn't matriculate. Right? What changes can we make? What considerations do we need to take into account in order to try to move that needle just a little bit? Next slide. All right, so looking at the distribution data for the class of 27. So this is looking at just the cumulative or the weighted GPA for first-time freshmen. So we took out transfer students. And what you can see, the average 361 for the class of 27, 367, the class of 26, 365. for the class of 24 and 25, excuse me, 363 for the class of 24. While the bell curve is a little bit tighter for the class of 6, there's a lot of similarities. And I want to brief some stats out that show you that this class is really academically, when you look at weighted GPA and even unweighted GPA, looking at that academic GPA, very similar to the class of 25 and even the class of 24. So the percentage of students that matriculated with a 3.5 GPA or above. So for the class of 27, it's 59%. For the class of 26, it was 68%. For the class of 25, it was 62%. And for the class of 24, it was 61%. So again, the class of 26, while the bell curve is a little bit tighter, it should be said that there wasn't a huge wait list. I think just the number of applicants was significantly reduced. We know about what yield was. So what we can say is that academically, this class that we brought in is closely mirrors the class of 25 and 24 along traditional GPA for first-time freshmen. For the percentage of incoming RATs that had a 4.0 or above, the class of 27, that's 27%. For the class of 26, that's 24%. Class of 25 and 24 are both at 26%. For the percentage under 3.0, so again, looking around the middle, the high end, and on the lower end, percentage under 3.0, class of 27, 13%, the class of 26, 4%, the class of 25, 10%, and the class of 24, 8%. Any questions?
Question.
Sir.
I can't read it, but it looks like, is that a 1.25 GPA of somebody?
So these are in buckets or bins. And so the GPA is based on a quarter percentage point. So that is a 149.
Okay.
All right. Let's move on to the next slide. So this is looking at the academic GPA. So with respect to the way that we evaluate in the Office of Admissions, and I think the Academic Affairs Committee is going to take this up and look at it later today in terms of how we arrive at our VMI ranking. What's that evaluation process look like? The same weight is given to academic GPA as it is to cumulative GPA and also course strength. Actually, academics in terms of the evaluative process account for about 65% of the weight. So with respect to academic GPA, again, this is unweighted and looking at just core classes. So it takes out physical education, a lot of the filler classes. Those that are 3.5 or higher. For the class of 27, it was 37%. Class of 26, 46%. Class of 25, 35%. And the class of 24, 32%. And again, we could go through but generally speaking, the class that we brought in, the class of 27, tracks really closely with the class of 25 and the class of 24. With the class of 26 being slightly stronger academically. Any questions? Let's move on to the next slide. All right, so the class of 28. So also looking back, we're looking ahead. So this is where we're at as of yesterday at 1:30. And what you see on the right is sort of a comparison point in time. The dates are a little bit different because point in time data is really hard to pull. But where we currently stand, we're starting the cycle with 14,135 inquiries. So that's more inquiries than we ended the class of 27. We have a goal of adding about 2,500 to 3,000 inquiries so we can get back up to about 17,000, 60,500. So that's a positive thing. When we take a look at the number of applications, we have 567 applications either started and they're in progress or they're completed. When you add in the 579 suspects in the Common App, so these are individuals that they haven't started their application in the Common App, but they've selected VMI as one of the schools that they're going to apply to. That number increases to 1,146. Now, we know that not every prospect is going to submit their application, but what we can say with 100% confidence is that we sit in a better position today than we did on this date last year, the year before, and the year before that. So point in time comparison for the class of 27 on 29 September. I started 26 September. Point in time day is a little bit hard to get from previous years. But on 29 September last year, we were at 11,235 increase. We had 296 applications started, and only 130 of them were submitted, completed nursing. Sir.
Colonel Hay, yeah, I love the lingo suspects. I assume you can identify those suspects. So are you gonna, I assume you all are gonna filter that group and look for really good targets to go out and work once they've indicated at least some kind of inclination?
So in our CRM, we have higher sophomore conflow built out, junior conflow, and then senior conflows. So these folks, depending on where they're at in the admissions funnel or the admissions process, if you will, they're receiving targeted communication from us. And that's been the change this year as of previous years, is the communication that we're sending out is really designed to elicit a certain type of behavior. We want them to take an action. It's not necessarily an info dump. We want them to get to that next step. So those individuals have their own conflow. And once they move to that next phase where they start the application, because in the Common App, there is no completed. It's either you start or you submit. Whereas the 88 number that you see up there, they've answered all the questions. They just haven't signed their, right? And so that's a pretty easy nudge to get them to take that last step. But yes, we're actively reaching out to them and trying to nudge them. We started what I called back in November, and I think January and April, our Lost Point campaigns. We started those in late October, early November. So we identify those stages of the funnel where we see leakage. We're going to try to, around the same time, we're going to ramp up those communication campaigns within our office and try to move those folks through the funnel to that next step.
The early acceptance, do we have a data, I'm sure you do, percentage that actually were early accepted that actually matriculate?
We do, yes, and I can get that. I don't know it off the top of my head.
I mean, is it high?
It is. It's typically, I want to say 63, 64% is sticking in my brain.
I would say that's low.
Early decision, yeah, early decision doesn't mean what it typically has meant in the past, where it's, you know, most where it previously meant that it was binding. In the higher ed world, that has sort of shifted, especially since competition has increased. I think folks have been a little bit lenient there. It's pretty much standard par for the. But what I can say with the total number of early applicants, and they have a higher likelihood to matriculate, we ended the 2027 cycle with 272. And so we're 6 weeks into the cycle. We haven't even got to that heavy application push yet, and we have 183 that are either completed or in progress. So.
When we look at the data here, which of these categories are going to will the Common App make it hard to compare this year to previous?
Well, this isn't the attack. So the weekly report that it's going to be a little bit, it's going to be more in depth, where we actually break down the difference in data between the Common App and our primary application. So right now, I think about 35% of our applications are coming through the Common App. I expect that to decrease a little bit, but when the board is able to I think we're going to look at the end of this month, start producing that report and put it into the folder. You'll be able to see that breakdown of regular decision, early decision, whether it's Common App or primary app, and so you can track that.
Can we compare it to prior years?
I don't think we can. I think this is really a year we have to establish baseline because it's something that's new. It's helping us accessibility in Virginia. It's definitely helping us be more accessible out of state. I really think this is a year to establish a baseline.
So the entire app process will be easier for our applicants. We've heard criticism in the past. The application process just very cumbersome.
Yes, sir. It is. It's 2 clicks from our homepage. You can go there now if you want to try it. It's 2 clicks and it takes about 10 minutes. Don't charge an application fee. So we're trying to make it, while the standards haven't changed, what we require hasn't changed. We're just trying to make it easier to apply.
Maggie, do you expect any change in like the projected yield this year, or are we kind of keeping that strategy the same?
I anticipate that there will probably be a slight decrease. I'm going to get to that in the next slide, ma'am. That's okay. But a slight decrease, just with the shifting change and the number of students that are attending college. So, all right. Good to know. Next slide. So don't want to spend a lot of time on this. This just sort of overlays our recruiting timeline for the year, and they're color-coded by activity. What you can see is that in the early fall into the early midwinter is really your primary recruiting period. And then when you get into February, March, and really April, that's where the focus shifts from really recruiting to yield. But those are all the activities that not just my team, but folks in this room, the alumni agencies, faculty, parents council, everybody on the team really engages throughout the year to try to bring in the best young men and women to VMI. The RAC class projection. So when we look at the number of inquiries, our shift in strategy of where we landed and ended the class of 27, where we'd like to get to, we've sort of changed what we projected out in October. Ultimately, we want to, by for the class of 2031, end about 19,692 inquiries. And we're on track right now with the rate at which we're adding volume to the funnel to hit that, as long as certain things hold. Our 5-year projection. So as I briefed earlier, the acceptance rate was 81%. The yield rate was 50%. What we want to see happen, and we feel like we can with the addition of the Common App, the changes that we've made in strategy, we want to slowly try to bring that acceptance rate down to about 70% over the course of 5 years, or I guess not 4 years. We want to hold yield at around 45 to 50%. Ultimately, to get to our final target of matriculant number of 550 for the class of 2030. And then that is all for me, if subject to any questions.
It may not be, if you took that last exhibit though and projected out, what does that mean for total core size roughly? That may, you just,
Right.
size of looking at the capacity in barracks and so forth.
Right. Assuming the rate of retention, then you're looking at probably about 1750 to 1775.
31.
Correct, yeah. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask one quick question while we're on it? And this is really Mareshi, but I think the way I read that, the breakdown you did of the classes, it sounds like the smaller class from last year, academically speaking, looked like a decent on average. Do you see that reflected in the core? I mean, yeah, I'm just wondering about about like the real impact in classrooms. Do you feel like?
I don't know, the ACPRO numbers for our current third class were not, they were less because it was a smaller class, right. But on
they're in line with
percentage basis, it was somewhat in line.
Okay.
I think there's some challenges with that class, with several classes because of the pandemic and how they learned and how they were taught in high school. So they're not. I don't see it so much as the academic ability. There's an adjustment to a in-classroom deadlines that matter. So I'd say last year's class, that was to me what I heard from department heads was that was a bigger, also Miller Center student having to get used to the structure. Deadlines actually mean something. It doesn't mean deadlines don't necessarily mean anything in some high schools. So, but overall they were.
Kind of normal that stand out. And then one other, I'm sorry, last question. General, you mentioned that you're looking for somebody at the Miller Center. I'm just interested. What is your vision for what sort of characteristics or experience, like what do you want in that role? Like what is the right person to run the Miller Center?
So I'll just give you my perspective, John, and then I'd like to just kind of speak to some of the things that we've talked about. So the whole idea of these academic support resources is to provide for any student the ability to kind of learn how to kind of, number one, get themselves prepared and acclimated to college life. Presently, I think there are some very, very basic things that the Miller Academic Center has been doing that we've talked about between myself and the previous director of the Miller Academic Center into kind of beefing up our understanding and our appreciation of what those shortfalls might be, right? So the dean will talk about several of the tools that she had put in motion to employ this year in terms of examining and understanding their preparedness in terms of math skills, writing skills, all right? But using some tools, some online tools, some other tools to help us kind of hone in on where the strengths and weaknesses might be for each individual student. But there's also other things about some of the things about organizing themselves for the day, you know, learning how to prepare themselves for exams, when to do that, what that all entails. Those are some of the things that we're talking about, creating innovative approaches to doing what we've done in the academic center, but doing more of it by grabbing a hold of and using tools that are more kind of state of the art, best practices across the industry.
Just to add to that, that's right on point. Back to your question, what the director should be.
Looks like, right.
For me, someone certainly experienced in this space, but can take what General Wood just said and build a vision, create a vision, a strategic plan for the center. How to, and for me, how that person has to buy into that we are an academically rigorous place, and how do we build those support systems and mentoring systems for any cadet who's identified as at risk, which is not necessarily perfectly correlated. It's not perfectly correlated with income level or Pell. Identifying at risk from a standpoint of being able to succeed academically and then providing them the support services and the mentoring that's necessary. And some of it could be how to manage their own day. Some of it could be there's deficiency in a reading or a math skill or a comprehension skill, but then having the support tools in place. So this person really needs to be able to not only explain and provide documentation what that looks like, but then deliver on that through some staffing additions that we have funding for because of the Pell Grant Initiative, funding funding. So it'll be a number of additional support people in the Miller Academic Center. And we're also at the same time working with the advising committee, which is faculty, to look at how do we get better at being academic advisors? What are the best practices in that space that we're not currently doing, and how does advising? All underneath it all is always, we're not going to give away C's. It's about to earn the grades. We're going to keep the rigor, but recognizing that for a lot of high schools and middle schools and lower in the country, that students don't necessarily come prepared as much as we want them. And certainly certain ways they're treated, high school especially. Just teaching them, convincing them that all our rules and regulations mean something. And sometimes some get that sooner than others.
We say our acceptance rate is currently
This year, 81%.
81%, and then the goal is 70?
We want to try to get back down to 70%. I think if you look at the slide, I think it was 73, 72, 71, 70%.
What's the acceptance rate compared to our competitors?
So the Citadel ask is 98.6%. Norwich is 82.6%. Some in-state schools that we compete with for students, George Mason, 91%, James Madison, 78, and this came from their 22-23 common data sets, which are available online. Longwood, 90%, and Christopher Newport, 89%. So in-state, we're on par. But again, I think we do better than others when it comes to yield, getting them to the door.
Historically, we've been in the 60 to 70% range. Look at the last 10 years.
I would say even a little bit better than that. I think for the acceptance rate has been in the 55 to 65% range. Yes, sir. Yeah. Last year at 70% was definitely an uptick. And this year, obviously, it's another uptick. I'm going to bring that down, but still maintain 45 to 50%.
Seems like this is a challenge across the board. Is this demographics in America, young people wanting to go to college, available to go to college?
It is. It is, and I think there's a lot of promise programs that are happening in various states. I mean, I know there's a somewhat of a promise program, if you will, across the state, which is free, where we don't necessarily see the data coming from the clearinghouse because a lot of students are selecting non-credit programs where they're making 80 to 100K a year with a 16 to 20 week commitment, right? So we don't necessarily see that reflected in the data that we can get from the clearinghouse and other sources, but it is a national problem.
So speaking of another national program or problem, so the FAFSA simplification is upon us. So remember briefly the last board meeting, or for those that are new, hearing a lot of talk about the FAFSA. I just want to give you the brief oversight of what this means. So when a family is completing the FAFSA, there's going to be fewer questions. So it makes it easier for the families, right, to an extent. What it does on the back end is it makes it far more complicated for financial aid offices across the country. So the biggest delay and the biggest impact, and this is very key for every school, so VMI included, but we are in the same boat with every school. FAFSA does not open until December. Typically, it's been October 1st. Since they made the change from March 1st to October 1st, it's been October 1st. It is now in December with a date that has not been released yet. So December 1, probably December 22nd, if I'm being very pessimistic. But the big point is this is a huge delay with our recruitment. From athletics to Joe's team, we really wanted to have our financial aid office have their award letters or offer letters out in December. I'm pushing for January. VMI is set up very strongly for this because we don't have a lot of cumbersome rules in our system. What that means is FAFSA is going to change all the questions. They have to update it from the Department of Education standpoint. When they update those systems, your school's student information system, so colleague, banner, whatever program they use, they have to update because they have to make the updates from the Department of Education. So then the schools make their updates for software, and then the financial offices have to package, how they award, how they identify. All of that has to be completely rephased and honed in based off of the new FAFSA. Where VMI looks out, we don't have a lot of rules. We don't have a lot of, let me clarify that. We don't have a lot of rules in the packaging software where that's going to be a huge impact for us in awarding. So what that means for our families, FAFSA will open. We're going to push it out to them. Joe's team working with athletics, push out the notifications to families and our current core to do the FAFSA. And then we are going to try and get those offer letters out as quickly as possible because unlike other schools, our rules are pretty simple. 100% need, 60% need, and that doesn't look like it'll change right now. So what this is really going to look like, the EFC is now the student aid index. So there is no equivalency, which is the big thing. I can't look at a student and say your EFC was 0, which means your SAI is 0. It doesn't work like that. And that's because the income, the assets, all of the questions on the FAFSA have changed. So there is no way to take current data and project, really this is where we're going to land. Now, what is helpful is the NASPA organization, which is the National Association for Student Financial Aid Administrators, has released a modeling tool. And they're going to send out another updated modeling tool in October that will allow us to do an apple-to-apple comparison. So we will take our 23-24 class and academic year, and we will be able to say, okay, we had X amount of Pell eligible, and now we're going to have X amount of Pell eligible going forward. Families, they can now have a negative SAI of 1,500. That basically means that you're neediest students. So those are ones that would basically be Pell or a 0 EFC for full Pell. The family size is no longer part of the need analysis formula. So basically, if I'm a family and I have 2 in college, I don't get the benefit of having 2 in college anymore. That's been removed. And then the family size now correlates to what is on their tax return. And so in some ways, that makes it easier for families, right? But in other ways, it's more complicated for the financial aid officers because of trying to figure out who is actually going to be on that. So the other impact to families, and this is probably the big one, the second bullet point in the middle, the federal tax information, which is known as FTI, that is very, very strict data. This is now becoming relevant to the IRS tax code laws. So basically what happens is if a family or a student, not necessarily at VMI, but a student with a spouse, right, for other schools, anyone who goes on the FAFSA is now a contributor. And each contributor has to give consent to have their federal tax information put onto the FAFSA. So that is a change from what has happened historically, where the data retrieval tool would pull in bits and pieces of this. FAFSA simplification has expanded the access into the tax return for those families, which is great. It's going to save on the paperwork and kind of the confusion what comes through. But I project that we're going to have a barrier with that, because if you have a split family, for example, maybe they don't get along, they're going to have to work together, because it will let the students submit the FAFSA, but it will not let us do anything for them. That can't do anything, and that's per law. So we have a plan. We are communicating that. We are trying to get ahead of this. My open house presentations are already being drafted and curated to help give families notice on this so they can maybe work together, get their FSA ID done now, but that's going to be a huge impact for all schools. Those with incomes between $60,000 and $100,000 likely to be impacted, probably negatively based off of the data. And then overall, though, the assumption is that while small pockets of students will be impacted, that they'll lose their eligibility for Pell Grant, overall more students will be eligible for the Pell Grant. Because remember, the Double the Pell initiative is really double the amount of Pell, but also double the amount of students eligible for the Pell Grant. I just threw a lot at you that I've been training on all summer. So, so takeaways, of course, every school's in the same situation. It does not matter where you're at or who you are. You get the FAFSA at the same time, and it's going to be really who is quickest to get their software up and get things going out the door. Our side, our office has been training all summer. We have to make brand new policy and procedures for how things are done in the office, be able to communicate effectively to families and students and what this means for them. We have some data that we're waiting for in October, and then I'll be getting with General Clark and his team so we can figure out what are we going to do for families who maybe lose their Pell Grant eligibility. They are a current second year or third year or something. If they're going to lose their Pell Grant, how can we help them, and what does that look like? What's the impact to BMI and to our student population? And we're just trying to track all these little nuances. Fortunately, no one in financial aid really knows what the impact is going to be. So it's a lot. I'm happy to take any questions about this, though.
Shannon, you said everybody's in the same predicament, but does this delay people making decisions, or is that really how it should show up as we monitor numbers?
Yes, it will. Especially if they're going to be looking at their financial aid as the reason why they're choosing to go to a school.
Yeah.
So even if you have an early admissions process, which we do, okay, well, if FAFSA doesn't open until now and you're waiting out on your need-based aid, how are we going to get this out as quick as possible? So that's where Joe and I have been working really closely on this, training his team as well, so we can help get out there in front of them and let them know as soon as possible to do that. But I do expect it's going to impact all families' decisions, because financial aid is a huge reason on attending college.
Is that December opening date, is that just this year because it's updated, or is that?
Okay, so the rumor is it's just this year, and it'll go back to October 1st going forward. So it's kind of like a 1-year mass chaos. And I say that because everything has to just completely be built from the ground up. And so they've delayed. Per regulation, they have until January before they have to open the FAFSA. So I think they're on pace, but they're being a little tight-lipped about it too. So I don't know officially if we're on pace, but we're all kind of, December is great, but it'd be nice to have a deadline in December so we can tell families too. Our open houses will be completed for the fall by then, and to not have a date to tell families, it makes the communication more of a challenge. We're gonna have Joe put it through the CRM. We'll send out information from the financial aid office. It's already on the website, all the changes, it's already being tracked on the website so families can find it. But it's a mess.
One of our goals that worked well this year was to be able to, with the acceptance, have a financial aid package in hand. So showing them not only are you accepted, we really want you, here's your package. We can't necessarily do that this year. Do you have communication to go with that acceptance?
So really, as Joe said, the yield campaign in the spring, where you're really focusing on that part of the funnel, that will be kind of how it was this year, where we're sending out both pieces at the same time. We're going to have a gap for just a couple months. It's not a huge gap, but we're very cognizant of that delay. And so what I would like to see, and I know I've talked to Beth, how do we make that communication? Okay, you've had your provisional appointment. Don't forget you need to do X, Y, Z. FAFSA opens your, what can we communicate to push to make sure they know that we know they want to know about their financial aid, right? So we do have a plan for it, but I can only plan so much on waiting on the Department of Ed. Yes, sir.
Do we have enough resources internally to process all this information? Because it seems like it's going to be a race to who gets it done first to release some anxiety for students that are accepted. And I just wondering internally, do you have the resources, or do we have a firm believer in Murphy's Law that we can take from another section and maybe help you out?
I appreciate that, first of all. I think my team is able to do that. Like I said, what the student information systems have done is they have created what's called a mapping tool, which basically said, here's the new questions on FAFSA. Here's what you can run in your to see what change, which when I say rules, that's how the system determines based off of their FAFSA, how much money they get, right? All of that, we had two rules that had to be kind of revamped, and they were pertaining to homeless youth. So really, I don't foresee our system being as much of the issue. The timing, we do it all the time, so the timing probably isn't that big of an issue either. But I have already briefed both Major General Wins and Chief about the possibility if it gets to be too much, can we look at something stopgap to fill it in? But right now, I'm feeling pretty confident about it, only because some schools are far more complicated. So to give you an example, my predecessor institution, they had to hire a consultant because their rules are so complicated how they work. And they did have to hire somebody just to rebuild how they did the packaging. BMI's kept it easy in its simplicity, and our goals with awarding that, I don't see that being quite the impact.
See data on trending on ROTC scholarships, Minuteman scholarships for Reserve Component and National Guard, simultaneous membership programs where they can do Virginia National Guard tuition assistance, which is currently at $7,000 a year, getting ready to go up, pressing for full tuition assistance. What are you seeing trending there?
Well, I knew someone was going to ask me that, and I have it in my binder. It is about par right now. I do see that we went up a little bit this year, especially with Navy ROTC, just with the call to duty. They saw a huge increase, and I can show you those numbers slide or two. I honestly think that with the call to duty and the other initiatives coming in, that those are game changers.
Yes.
But it also just helps on the flip side with commissioning rates as well, right? So it kind of, you get twofold benefit from that as well. But I did pull that data, but off the top of my head, I don't have it. I can get it to you. All right, this is a lot of information. Key takeaways, it's every school, your financial aid office, we are working very hard to make sure we're communicating and students and just being ahead of the game as much as we possibly. So call to duty. So this is from December 16th. This is actually the website clicks. So this is all of your website traffic data. I'm not going to just go over this. You have this in your packet. But the big takeaway from this is that we actually launched the call to duty campaign at the tail end of when the admissions recruiting cycle was already going on, and this was the results. So if you remember that we didn't even kind of do a full thing of pushing. December 16th is when the application actually opened. And from then until June 30th, this is the number of clicks, applications, time spent on the page, everything that generated. So here are your numbers for call to duty. So 262 unduplicated applications. Of that, 125 were eligible. And then 33 were actually awarded, but they did not matriculate. Those 33 are the ones that we lost to the academies primarily. Some of those ones didn't lie that they were snagged away. 3 of those that were awarded left during matriculation week, so we canceled the award. 3 have been funded from other foundation funds. If you remember, if they met the criteria for another private donor fund, I awarded them from that. There was 3 of those. 5 could have been awarded the call to duty, but they were a P Scholar, athletic aid, or Institute honors or merit scholarships. So total, 81 were awarded. So of that, it's over 818,000. If you break this down, specifically the 3 from the other foundation funds, they were broken down. They were all out of state. They were all on a 4-year, 2 Army, 1 Air Force. And those that had other financial aid that they couldn't receive, call to duty, there was 4 of those, 2 Navy, 2 Army, 3 males, 1 female, 3 4-year, 1 3-year. So really good representation.
So that 81, that include the 33 that were awarded but didn't matriculate?
No.
Okay.
No, 81 is where we landed, who it still is listed on their account as of right now.
So for the 3 who left during matriculation week and the award was canceled, are those funds going to be recycled for others who didn't make the 81 cut list, or is that money going to be refunded or added back into the pot for the next class coming in?
Either added back into the pot for next year or for a future, looking at David and Chrissy. We're not going to expand. Everyone who could have had call to duty has already been awarded. So there's no one on the wait list or anything like that, if that helps answer your question.
Shannon, would you mind backing up just a bit? Because I'm not sure all the board members know about this. So this is an award to people. To be eligible, you have to have a 4-year ROTC scholarship.
You have to have a 3-year ROTC scholarship incoming to VMI, which means you had to have it in hand before you came to VMI.
And what is the call to duty?
Correct. It covers your room and board for all 4 years, assuming you maintain good status and you maintain the scholarship, the ROTC scholarship. My apologies.
And one thing to that. So yes, they have selected that they're coming to VMI, they're bringing their scholarship to VMI, but we actively recruit, reaching out to individuals that have received scholarships or been awarded scholarships that have selected another institution, right? We talked to them about the value proposition, the benefits of earning a VMI degree and transferring that scholarship to VMI. And we were able to flip quite a few folks that were originally attending another SMC, junior military college, or even some of the academies. They end up matriculating this fall.
You know how many we were able to flip?
I know off the top of my head, 7.
7 or 8.
1 or 2 from one of the academies. Was it 1 or 2?
I have a Norwich, I have a couple Citadels, I have 2 West Points.
And then there was a few.
Penn State.
North Georgia was 1, and then a few others as well.
And for the new board members, that's a complete reversal from the year before where we weren't covering that gap, but the other schools were, and we lost a bunch of people, our competitors.
On that point, how does the 81 3 or 4 year ROTC scholarships in this RAC class compare to prior years?
Read that again, I'm so sorry. Did you hear that?
We had 81 come this year with 3 and 4 year scholarships. How did that compare to prior years?
Significantly higher. I can speak for Colonel Homiak. The Navy doubled the number of ROTC winners they brought in.
I think it's important to look at the delta. We can see the impact of this money spent and really understand it.
No kidding.
I think it definitely impacted or helped our in-state, out-of-state ratio. That's great. Yeah, 25% of out-of-state students are call to duty recipients.
No, I break that down in the next couple slides as well.
You almost think from a fundraising perspective, this is something you could go out to alumni with. Right. I'm not.
We have.
All right. This is a incredible endeavor right here.
Those 3 that left at matriculation week, did they give up their ROTC scholarships?
VMI they did. Whether they were able to transfer it to another, I don't know.
There's also work that we need to do, just kind of really to understand the return on investment, right? So there's a cost associated with doing the call to duty, but the return, I think, probably could be 8 to 10 fold. So we've got to do the analysis on that to be able to come back and explain, hey, small investment, big return. I think the other thing I would point out is the conversation about the value of and synchronization that's occurring between admissions and financial aid, marketing, and also bringing in the ROTC departments now. It's just much stronger than it's ever been, because what it's allowing us to do is it's allowing the conversations between admissions and the ROTC departments to take place, where they are going after kind of the same crop of kids, as opposed to advising a kid to apply for a scholarship who might have applied to VMI, whereas you have this set that the ROTC departments are tracking, where now it's about selling, it's about marketing to that particular group.
We're working with Air Force because there are scholarship programs changing, where they're not seeking high school 4-year scholarships. They're going to litmus test them and then make 3 and 2-year scholarships.
That's their primarily, or 2 and 3-year scholarships. And that comes from the national, if I'm correct, it comes from the national endeavor. So I'm not sure how much we'll see. There's one this year that was a Space Force recipient, actually. So
would they not be eligible for the Call of Duty?
If they have to have it in hand when they come.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Also tracking the ROI over time of seeing what your retention rates are in those cohorts. Again, intuitively anticipate that from matriculation to graduation for those full scholarships, hold on to them.
Correct. So my intent is to take this 81 and track them year to year. So fall and then also through graduation. Next slide, please. So here's your breakdown of that. So the 81, you had Space Force, 4 in Air Force, 9 Navy, 15 Marine, and 52 Army. 35% of them were in-state, 65% are out-of-state. You had 14% female, 86% male, and then your 4 years were at 48% at 52%. So it's really neat when I pulled this data separate from Joe that you compare it to the class profile, that you'll see some similarities in those percentages.
Last question, the funding for the Call of Duty program that's coming out of the Institute, correct?
So the class of 27 was funded through the alumni agencies, and we have discussions going on right now for funding for continuing.
Has the Institute considered taking that as a legislative effort to the Commonwealth, that the Commonwealth recognize the importance of this program across the Virginia state colleges and universities as a propensity to serve? And that's something I'd be glad to talk with the team about.
Sure. We haven't considered it at this point, but yeah, I'd certainly be interested in discussion.
It's a win-win for the Commonwealth, and not only for VMI, but if we can bring that to our General Assembly and allow us to fund other things with this program.
I just want to, I know through the course of the conversation, I just want to commend y'all, because that's exactly what we were hoping, was to see more out of state. So just highlight the fact that this was one of those things that was executed and actually turned out the way we anticipated.
In addition to your efforts, extensive efforts in working directly with each of the ROTC departments, which they have come back with positive feedback on that as well. Thank you.
Well done.
I will echo both those comments. Absolutely. And I think what this also highlights is something that we talked a lot about in April, especially with regard to the cost of attendance for out of state, which is an area that Joe said we're vulnerable on, because the cost, we are not competitive. And we know that ROTC helps make up that difference in this. We're seeing it. This is a great step, but I think we will continue to have the challenge for cadets who don't come in with 3 or 4 year scholarships, but might get scholarships later on, and those who are not going to commission, that we still have to attack that out of state
number, this shows that we can be successful at it. But I think it only probably illustrates the challenge that we have on a long range basis.
That's a lot. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
I think very well done, guys. Thank you.
Morning. So I'll try to keep this brief, but one thing I just want to say back to my previous comments, vast majority of the students we bring figure this place out and do just fine. But we're working at the margins, trying to raise our retention rate without lowering academic standards. We can raise our retention rate with quality students on the way in. The pressure to bring in a larger class is mitigated, right? You saw the numbers for a target of 550. Retention rate is about 83, 84%. If we can maintain rigor, get that rate to 90% over the next several years, you raise the size of the core without you make admissions job easier because they can be more selective at the margin because we're not under the same pressure to say, get a certain size. So just want to spend a few minutes talking about this, right? The retention rate based on, next slide. So what we did, looking at projecting out from the fall of this current RAC class, is we looked at 12, 5, and 3-year averages and to try to project what, based on current retention rates from those 12, 5, and 3 years, what projected retention would be for this class. So some definitions, what we look at is what's called FTFs, first time full-time matriculants. So we brought in 490 plus 1, 491. Some of those are transfers. One had an unknown high school GPA, one was about 2.0. We exclude those. That's traditional. We have so few transfers, we just take them out of the mix. So we look at what's called first time, full time, 447. And then when we're talking about retention, we're not talking about that number. We're talking about how many are left at census date, which for us is the close of business on drop add, which is a week after the semester starts. When you look at this data across schools in the Commonwealth or certainly, and then across other states, the census date, Sept gives us a range. I think it's 14 days after the start of the semester. So what the census date is relative to the start of first day of classes varies across schools in the Commonwealth. The definition is variable across states. I've seen schools with a census date at the end of September, and they have a start date at the beginning of September. So, but our census date is the drop add. So those students who matriculate but are not here on the last day of drop add, which is a week after the semester starts, are not part of the retention percentage. The retention percentage is what percent of those students who are still here on the census date come back as third class cadets. So when you think of that in numbers, say, oh, if we had 500 rats and retention was 80%, that's 400. Well, that's not quite right because some of those 500 won't be here, historically, for a variety of reasons at census day. So doing that, we project that if we keep the same retention rate approximately as the past 12 years, somewhere in the 83, 84% range, we would, out of this year's class, again, we'd have about somewhere between 69 and 82 would not be retained. So, next slide. So I won't go through all averages, but here's very typical averages. This is 12 years. This is going back to 2010, 2011. If high school GPA is above 4, we typically are retaining 90+%. In the last 3 years, it's 93%. 3.5 to 3.99, it's typically in the mid to high 80s. You get down to 3.0, 3.49 high school GPA, you're anywhere from, in 12 years, it's 81%, a little bit less in 3 to 5 year And then when you get down to the lower GPAs, low retention. So academics does matter, right? So we're taking out of this mix those who maybe didn't leave for academic reasons. They left before census date for other reasons. This wasn't the right place for them. They didn't like the rat line. They were just testing it out, as we heard today. That's why we need virtual reality so I can test it out. But our lower GPAs, we have less of those students than we do of the higher GPAs, but more of them aren't retained. So when we talk about retention, trying to raise retention using the Miller Academic Center and academic advising, in a target of trying to move 83% to 90%, you're not going to get there by raising the retention rate significantly in the low GPAs. There's just not enough bodies there. The sweet spot, when you look at this data, is in the 3.0 to 3.49. There's a lot of students in that GPA. So you raise that retention rate, right, you're going to have a bigger hit to the overall size of the core. So at 12 years, 69%. Next 5-year average, and you see the percentage there for the last 5 years, the average retention, and 82. And next 3-year average, and very similar percentages, in about 75. So using historic. Now you've heard this morning trying to get at increasing retention without lowering rigor, the academic standard in the classroom. So hoping that over time that our retention number will go up, and so that this number will go down. Okay, and just to walk through a little bit more on this chart, it's the same columns you'll see in your data. So the 467, the matriculant column, not the 491. Came on census date, 445, projected retention at based on historic 370. So again, the retention is off of the census date, not off of the matriculants. So of course, working to make this spread less, right, by what we can do in professionalizing the rat line and cadre and so forth. But from my standpoint, getting at the academic. And probation. So this is a 4-year average. Looked at who ends up on academic probation using the short 4-year averages. So students that come in with a high school GPA above 3.5, only about 4%, 4.5% end up on academic probation. What is this? This is probation in spring of their rat year. Probation in spring of the rat year means their GPA is less than 1.50. No number of credit hours passed for Act Pro like there is for a returning third, second, or first. It's strictly GPA. If their fall GPA, including STP, is less than 150, they're on Act Pro in the spring of their what will be their 4th class year. So those coming in with a 3.5 or better high school GPA, only about 4.5% of them end up on Act Pro. And numbers are what they are. That's very typical, right? You might expect that, right? They say, well, if they have a lower GPA, they're more apt Pro. But their numbers are small, right? There's very few numbers. So when you change that percentage at the 2.0 to 2.49 or 2.5 to 2.99, there's not that many students. So the Act Pro total numbers don't change much when those percentages change. But as reference for what we're looking at over here on the bottom, in class of 23, 40 ended up on Act Pro, 24, 46, 561, class of 26, 52. So question earlier about the quality of this year's 3rd class, still have 52 Act Pro in January. Those are who returned in January. So if anyone finishes the semester but doesn't return, if they were going to return on Act Pro but are not here, they're not in that number. But of those 52, by the way, 22 of them are back here this fall on academic probation. They didn't get out of it, but they did well enough to come back. So the other 30, some of them are suspended. They might come back, they might not come back. So again, as we deliver on what we've outlined, talked about a little bit about support services, the numbers are going to move a lot if we identify those students who are at risk, not just by their high school GPA. Clearly, high school GPA matters, but again, that 3.0 to 3.49 is where there's a lot of bodies. And again, admissions, right? They meet the admission standards. Our job is to not lower the academic standards, but to help them figure it out. So if you say, well, 41% are on ACPRO, that means of the 2.0 to 2.49s, that means 59% were not on ACPRO. That's good. So how do we get that number higher without lowering our standards? Next slide. So just a quick overview is what we've already initiated. So you heard General Wynn say that the football rats came to STP. They also they came a week prior when summer session 2 started and had a week of orientation activities, in part to help them get off to a good start in STP, but also because of the football practice schedule, they weren't going to be able to participate in some of the Hell Week academic orientation activities. So 167 completed. We added more tutoring and labs, if you will, with the faculty who are teaching the classes. And so those were come in, and our faculty can make appointments with the students to come in. If a student didn't do well on their first major assignment, they had to go talk to Miller Academic Center staff about, try to help them figure out what was the problem. Is it how to use a textbook? Is it study skills, etc. And the Miller Center conducted some diagnostic assessments, reading comprehension, math, trying to identify at-risk cadets. At risk doesn't mean be anywhere. And so we're trying to identify that and then provide the support services for it. Matriculation week, we changed. Typically, all we've done in matriculation week is a break for a few hours where the rats meet their academic advisors, have dinner, get to sit in an air-conditioned building for a couple hours, and call home if they want. Call the girlfriend or the boyfriend if that's more important than mom and dad. And this week, this year we did that, but we also added an entire day of academic orientation, working with the Commandant, rearrange what the non-academic portion of Hell Week. And so on Saturday, we had about 6 hours of academic orientation with the MAC and the S2 staff, talking about how do you transition from high school to college? What does that mean? Going through their academic standards, what do you have to do this year? And how to set goals, and how to use a planner and set a calendar, and how to use PostView, which is their courses and how to do it. Got some advice from the 26 rats. It's always good to hear from a rat, especially one who struggled. They don't do what I did. Next slide, last slide. And then we already had our first academic Saturday. We have several of these in the semester. This Saturday, second, these are the topics we covered, and trying to get to them in front of them sooner rather than later, and then some upcoming things. So with a new director, hopefully hired sometime in the next few months, we'll be able to assess this. We've got all this assessment data on the rats. Now, with a short staff, we just got to get into that data and see what it tells us, and then get in front of those rats for what skills that they're lacking to help them succeed. Questions?
Really good to see that y'all set this class and looked at the data to determine how big an issue, how to apply preemptive medicine. Good. Compliments.
Thank you.
I think based upon what I could hear from sitting in the audience, when someone's standing right here, the audio is working really well and you can hear back there. This seems to be the magic spot. So, okay.
You're not allowed to walk around Dallas. Just
No, I know. Right here. Okay. So let me know if that starts to cut out. I can move to the right spot. So just want to give you all, we'll go through this in more detail in the AFP, but give you the closeout of fiscal year 3 and then the 24 to 29 projections looking forward financially. So just start with the first slide. I'm going to break this slide down to several pieces. Main things I want you to take away from this is just the overall comparison between 23 and 24 on the revenue side. You're seeing the differences, differential in the not only the increase in tuition and fee rate, but also the increased number of enrollment that's affecting the overall revenue. You'll see at the second column here, the difference between the 51.6 and the 52.9. This reflects significant efforts of deferring spending, as well as other savings of roughly $5.9 million in the fiscal year budget. For the main piece I want you to take away from this slide is the number in the fiscal 23 column, the first column, just overall, this 882 net at the end of the year, when it's all said and done, we finished with finished in the black. As you all know, we talked in early April, looking at where we were. Now, obviously, they have those types of projections, but that's the result of where we sit in 23. I'll go through some other slides here as we go through, and just looking forward to the 24 to 29. Next slide. This breaks down just the revenues. As I mentioned before, this reflects the differences in the overall enrollment, the in-state, out-of-state mix, and the overall enrollments, or the overall revenues between the 51.6 and the 59. And then we've also got what's also reflected in here in the increased revenues is the additional investments from the agencies as they look at the 12-quarter rolling averages, as well as additional fundraising efforts that have been made. The breaking out the athletic agencies athletics, that 1.4 million is obviously a significant plus up over 24, and that reflects a lot of the fundraising that we've done is on the Compete to Win and other initiatives from the agency. So what you're seeing in 2024 is more typical, notwithstanding there may be some other efforts to undertaken by the agencies to plus up that other piece of it. But you'd see the other overall growth in the alumni agencies funds.
Just highlight that 21 million to 29 million. That's huge. Yep. And historic high.
So to clarify, the 21, it's not that the 29 wasn't necessarily available. There is some increases in there. What's also reflected here in the 21 million is also funds that were one-time cash funds that provide departments that may not have been spent. So maybe a gift to do certain activities that they didn't do in fiscal year 23, they may do that may one time. And so you're actually seeing actual dollars spent, not actual commitment from the agencies, which would have been higher.
All right, Dallas, I'll take you back to the previous exhibit. There are a lot of numbers there, but I assume the new cadet projection for the next few years, it's still being evaluated in light of the performance we just had. So, for example, we're only going up 4 between last year and this year. I assume that's going to be one of those key assumptions that people are going to be batting around a little bit.
I think as we continue to work through the budget development process, as we get to usually about the January timeframe is when we start to relook at where all the numbers are with admissions, start to forecast then. You all get an early look at the budget in the January board meeting where we will revise then again these enrollment projections. But you're right, the model had been the 495. We'll get a better feel from the overall admissions financial aid work, and that may be certainly adjusted as we go forward into the development, the finalization of the fiscal 24 budget. And 25 and out.
Right.
Next slide. So just getting to the expenditure side, this is what I want to highlight here is in the fiscal 24 column, you're seeing the 70.6 million. It's a pretty big jump from the 61.1. The 61.1 represents the significant savings in vacancy savings and other actions taken to reduce personnel costs. The 70.6 is a pretty significant increase. It includes several new positions that were funded through the One Core, One VMI initiative that are now operationalized into the budget. And so what I want to highlight here is while you're seeing these expenditures are jumping, the same time I'm talking about reductions, we know even today our personal expenses will not meet what we're projecting now because we've already gone through a quarter of the year with certain vacancies in some positions, as well as a lot of the other efforts that are into place to save expenditures, save funds are already into place in 24. But we're showing the fully loaded 24 numbers. Okay, next slide. It's just some other areas, just highlighting other areas where we had some overall reductions. You can see in fiscal 23, On the departmental operating accounts, we shaved off about $2.6 million out of departmental operating accounts. And while we're showing the plus up in 24, I mentioned previously, we're still holding a lot of those reductions going into the 24 budget now. So 24 shows you the fully loaded amount. Debt service, nothing magical there. That was really just a completion of paying off debt service on Borough Hall and Crozet Hall. So that's been reduced. That's really reflective of not taking on any new additional debt. Contingencies, budgets, reductions, as well as the small non-cap maintenance projects. You see reductions planned in 24. I did highlight with General Winds and highlight with you all, Mr. Gottwald and our previous leads up this. We know that those are areas where we have, it's really a lot of contingencies and things that come up. And so while we project those to be some major savings, that actually may not necessarily be realized. Next slide. This is just highlighting just the overall expenditures in fiscal 2023. $882,000 surplus for the year. And then just looking into 24. The next slide, just now look into the overall fund balance numbers. So what I want you to take away from this is the ending fund balance numbers and really just annual operating totals. I'm going to move from the X. So we're carrying the positive here. We're still carrying and showing a negative $3 million, a negative $4 million, a negative $2 million, and then in fiscal 27, correspondingly with the overall enrollment, you start to see we move up to 1.8. The low water mark then, of course, being fund balance of 17.1. I'll show you the next slide, sort of how that compares with what I briefed you all in April, but I think just in terms of the overall revenue picture, what that looks like, again, this is with the conservative estimates in enrollment. This is still assuming spending at budget levels and does not account for all the reductions that we've made and we're still going to be holding on to. So by all means, we expect to perform better than budget. The next slide. This is just comparisons of what you saw. We saw an enrollment projected of 450. Actually had enrollment of 491. The differential there in revenues from left to right screen. State general funds projected 27.5. Actually received 28.1. As you recall, we had some other pieces out there. We weren't quite sure what was going to take place with the governor's action. We didn't budget hold those in. Now we see those amounts that are now plugged in. So you see a difference in just overall revenue of about $3 million. If you look at the expenses, actual personnel services budget, roughly reduced by approximately 3.3 million, 2.9 million. And a lot of those savings are going to carry forward. Departmental operating accounts, savings of 2.9 million, and we'll carry those forward. So just big picture pieces at the very bottom, just the overall fund balance. We projected previously a 6.9, drawing that down to 6.9. We're now projecting to drop that down to the 17.1. Some of the guidance and the pieces that we received, just going through fiscal year 23 and closing out, just sort of check marks here. Active budget with conservatism, building modest fund balance results, and try and offset anything we could do to offset with any savings in 23 and carry that forward, showing that we've done that. Targeted 5% reductions, which was trying to capture about $5.8 million out of the budget. We shaved out $5.9 million out of the budget. We still have the expenditure controls in place with all expenses over $2,000 being approved by the senior executive. And then we still have in fiscal 24 to 26, we're still likely going to experience operating budget reductions to mitigate imbalances in the expenses and forecasted revenue. So we'll continue to hold on to those savings and likely outperform the budget projections. We still have to capture and deal with the unavoidable expenses, inflation impacts, the tuition and fee increases, enrollment projections. All that will continue to have active monitoring. We're going to go through this in a lot more detail. I know we're pressed for time. There's one more briefing behind me, but subject to your questions, that's my briefing on the financial. Mr. Jestro, sir.
Yeah, just one question. These projections, at what level are they prepared? Are they prepared at the department level and then rolled up and totaled, or how are they prepared?
They're prepared. Yes, they work their way from the bottom up with people's with the departmental budget requests, but really the way that we don't do a zero-based budget, really work off of the existing budget, push those back at departments, let them define the new requirements, if any, and what other additions they want to add to it. And then the considerations made around the table with the senior executive team about which budget should actually move up. Some may go down, some would be held flat. I'm not sure that's exactly answering your question.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, at the department level, do people, are they accountable? Do they realize what their budget is? And do they realize if they're on track to underspend, overspend, and then they would know what type of action to take to get things properly aligned?
I would say yes, and actually saw that in fiscal 23. Several hundred department lines that were targeted for reductions. The departments acting conscientiously and cooperatively with the senior executive team making those specific reductions. Now, a lot of those were coordinated with the senior executives and their teams about different reductions they were going to make. We were going to come back and see that those reductions were actually effectuated. So there's some budget line items. I'm not going to make it sound like we didn't have some that blew through. There's some in my own area, contingencies and chillers that go out. You got to jump and do them. And there's others that we didn't expect to be under that folks found ways to do some savings and turn that back in. So we've got quite a bit line items there specifically across all departments where they know what they've done. It's a great effort between the senior executives, big spenders, and running all the operations of the Institute. Huge pieces, obviously, in my area with the overall central plant, but academic board, conscientious, all the purchase card holders, every making conscious decisions. I think the overall guidance from General Wins was not to get ourselves in the mindset of scarcity. Those are my words, but don't get it where people are starting to chop away at excellence and not be able to perform and get after their tasks. We've got the savings. We've got a plan to utilize some of those savings to get us through, minimize the impact on those, but not get ourselves in a situation where all of a sudden we're really chopping at, to deliver the programs in a way that services the cadets in a positive way. A long answer to your short question. Yes is your answer. Thank you all.
You said it also illustrates the support we get from the agencies, so we need to continue to say thank you for that. Okay, Pat, there's the spot on the wall, not on the wall,
Right.
floor, actually.
So I'm Pat O'Leary. Tom asked me to, this is the first board meeting of the academic year, specifically board's duties and responsibilities in accordance with the Code of Virginia. So when you talk about the statutory responsibilities of the board, there's essentially 4 bodies of law that apply to boards and these. The first one are the enabling statutes, which are the statutes that basically provide the authority operation of VMI. But they also lay out some of the board's responsibilities. Talks about the board's composition, power to receive gifts and grants, removal of faculty, and then prescribe the course of cadet instruction. Some of the other enabling legislation talks about the composition of the board, the power to receive gifts, prescribe instruction, approve military scholarships, and confer degrees. The other body of law, and this applies to all boards of visitors across the state, is 23.1-1300. It talks about the board's ability to enact regulation policies, manage funds, appoint the chief executive, basic superintendent, fix tuition rates, grant easements, and some additional things that are within the purview of the board. They can adopt bylaws, which I'll talk about in a little bit. There's an annual evaluation of the superintendent that's done, an executive summary of work that's produced for the governor, and then all board members have to participate in mandatory Sept training. New board members have to do it right away. Existing board members have to do it every 2 years. So the board, by statute, has to appoint an executive committee. In our case, the executive committee is the president, 3 vice presidents, and then a non-alumni member. One of the biggest things about the executive committee is they can act on behalf of the board between board meetings. They organize the work processes of the board, recommend best practices, several other things there as well. They provide advice to the board on committee structure. They develop the orientation, review compliance with the Code of Ethics, and develop a set of qualification and competencies for the board. There you go. So one of the things the code requires is that the board promulgate its own bylaws. They're on our website. And again, on the BOV website, there are links to all of these things. So I would advise you, when you have some time, to just kind of peruse through these. In the bylaws, in addition to stating, it restates the statutory duties, but it also delegates the execution of documents to the superintendent. The requirements for attendance of meetings are laid out in the bylaws, and just the general rules for meetings, officers, and the structure of the committees. Okay, the next body of law that applies to your duties as Board of Visitors is the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. It covers two main requirements, the requirements for meetings and requirements for the production of documents. One thing I want to point out, which a lot of board members don't realize, is any document that you produce in your duties as a board member is typically subject to FOIA unless some exception applies to it. And that would include your personal emails, your text messages, anything sent on your personal phone. If it pertains to VMI business, then it's subject to FOIA. The other thing FOIA talks about is the meeting requirements. All meetings have to be open to the public unless you have a closed session, which I'll talk about in a minute. There's no discussion of VMI business among 3 or more members outside of noticed meetings. That's a requirement. So what do you do if you're out in public and 2 board members are talking and another board member walks up? Can't talk about VMI business. You have to change the subject. There's a slight caveat with this with regard to emails with hitting reply all. If there's a rapid succession of emails back and forth where everybody's hitting reply all, that could constitute a meeting. So you have to be careful about that. And then notices of meeting are typically posted 3 work days in advance. So here's the rule on electronic meetings. Since COVID, boards of visitors are allowed to have 2 complete electronic meetings per year. Typically, I think we've reserved those for executive committee meetings because they come out. Individually, you can participate in a meeting by phone or Teams. There has to be a quorum present, and there also has to be proper notice, and the public has to be able to participate in the meeting in the same medium. In other words, if it's by phone or by Teams, the public has to have access. As an individual board member, you get to participate electronically 2 times per year for a personal matter, or if you have a medical condition, it's unlimited. Okay, closed meeting exceptions. So there are certain topics that are more appropriate to be discussed during closed meetings, and they're laid out in the FOIA statutes. But in order to talk about something in a closed session, it has to fall under one of these exceptions. There's 40 exceptions. These are the ones that we typically use on a regular basis: personnel matters, scholastic records, legal advice. When I give an update of any kind of litigation, that's all done in closed meetings. Gift requests and special awards. But there are 40 of them. In order to talk about it, it has to fall under one of those exceptions. So the procedure for going into a closed meeting, typically there's a motion. The president indicates that we're going to go into a closed meeting. You have to say the statutory exception, which I just talked about, the general topic, and then the specific topic, for example, evaluation of superintendent. Once you're in closed meeting, only those matters can be discussed. That's where I kind of go into my watchdog mode, and I try to keep the discussion. When it starts to go off track, I raise my hand. And then when you reconvene in open session, there's a certifying vote to where it's taken by member, and basically it's confirmed that everything in the closed session, all the things that were identified to talk about in the closed session were discussed in the closed session, and only those matters. So action taken as a result of discussions in closed sessions must be taken once you reconvene. In other words, you can take a straw vote during the closed session to see how the board is going to vote, but an official action has to be taken in open session. So the question comes up, well, can I change my vote? Do I have to, if I vote one way during the closed session, do I have to vote that way in the open session? The answer is no. You can change your vote, but you might not be too popular with your colleagues. So. The last body of law I'm going to talk about is the Conflict of Interest Act. And there's a basic definition of a personal interest. It's whether you have a foreseeable direct or indirect benefit or detriment as a result of the action or the matter that's being discussed by the board or the board's taking action on. If that's the case, you must disqualify yourself from the board. So further definition of personal interest, this applies to you and your family members. It's including but not limited to a salary of more than $5,000 annually or an ownership in a business or property that exceeds 3% of the asset value of the business. So if this applies to you or a family member, then you have a personal interest in that matter. Again, conflict of interest sets forth a minimum standard of conduct. Basically, you have to avoid the appearance of impropriety. So if it looks like a conflict, smells like a conflict, tastes like a conflict, it's probably a conflict. Last thing, there's a requirement that you file a disclosure form laying out your personal interest. Once you come on the board, you have to do it immediately. Then there's an annual update you have to do by the end of January every year. That's it. Anybody have any questions?
Pat, if anybody ever finds themselves in a situation they're a bit, need some.
Please call me.
Please, exactly. I think that's.
Call me anytime.
Err on the side of checking in.
That's right.
If there's anything that seems to be, questionable.
Good point, Tom. All right, thank you.
Questions or comments? We covered quite a bit of ground in only 4 minutes over plan, which is thank you to all to make that happen. Cedric, thank you and the team. I think you covered an enormous amount of territory, which we'll get to in a couple of committee meetings. But before we break for committee meetings, any questions or with what's discussed or what the plan is for the rest of the day? And I guess it goes without saying, Bill, everyone's been introduced to the portal, so we'll find, if people have questions on portals and gets to a mechanical point, just work directly with you on it.
And so with the portal, this is kind of our beta test portal right now, this meeting. But in January, we're going to move completely electronically. So those of you who have security books, those will be taken from you. And anybody who needs electronics, we can provide that to you as well. There's actually a survey in the portal to mark whether or not you need a tablet to follow along for January. Committee meetings, 10:45 to 12:15. The Academic Affairs Committee, you guys are the walkers back to Smith Hall for the boardroom. Athletics Committee is upstairs in room 701. If you go out here, turn left, take the elevator in the back library all the way up. I have no idea what floor we're on right now. We're on the 5th floor. But if you just take it all the way up, it's the only room up there. And then Cadet and Military. And then we will reconvene back here at 12:30 for a working lunch to discuss the procedure.
And as you get your rat Bibles, you're supposed to stand staring at the walls. And so reconvene for lunch. We will be exactly right. We'll know when to start the meeting, Teddy.
I'm sure you fill it in.